Hello, I'm going to give a real quick defense of my paper that deals with the relationship between Christianity and the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. Basically, I think we all know the U.S. Constitution was very vague in reference to religion. The really only inclusion was in the First Amendment, where we have the freedom of religion clause. Going back to the Declaration of Independence, obviously it was a factor there, but that's where we first start to see in U.S. documents the idea of natural law um, coming into play. That being natural law being of divine influence. Anyways, to look at the actual relationship between the Constitution, which of course wasn't ratified until 1789, and Christianity, the 10th Amendment would drive us first to the state constitutions. And basically, you look at this as a learning laboratory for governance or Western governance, a kind of a new idea from what we've seen in Europe prior. But first, we should look at the state constitutions. So basically, in the period from 1776 until 1784, 12 states ratified constitutions. Two others maintained their original charters, that being Connecticut and Rhode Island. Of those 12 constitutions, 11 covered religious freedom. The only one that abstained was South Carolina, which was drafted and ratified prior to the Declaration of Independence. And basically, it didn't cover rights or even really the structure of the government. So much as a little bit of somewhat of an angry rant from the British government's heavy leaning into the states. Again, of those 12 state constitutions, 5 of them actually required religious tests to hold office. You had to affirm to varying degrees either a belief in Christianity, belief in the divine inspiration of Scripture. There's also several other different options there, but there were actually religious tests to hold office. And finally, 3 state constitutions recommended religion to the populace as a necessary for the proper governance of a society. Also, looking Articles of Confederation, of course, going back to the foundation of the Constitution, was very heavily based in state sovereignty. So there was very little influence there about rights. It left everything up to the state, and so it really didn't cover religion in any aspect. Um, so then that takes us to some of the founders themselves. And of course, one of the big controversies comes from Jefferson, his letter to the Danbury Baptists, which includes the term separation of church and state. Well, it's important to note there, Jefferson wrote a number of letters, and a number of them he defended himself and his belief that in accordance with the 10th Amendment and the First Amendment, that there be no federal establishment of religion. And this was very important, especially in that time frame, as there were a number of denominations in the U.S. And that were at some level of odds with each other. So establishing one denomination or sect over all the others would have caused a huge problem, internal strife, and is what Jefferson would say lead us towards a different kind of tyranny. He also wrote letters to Elbridge Gerry, Benjamin Rush, Samuel Miller, basically stating the same thing. His hands were tied, and he refused to partake in any forced acts of religion or belief in the federal Constitution because, as he stated numerous times, that responsibility lied with the state constitutions. Also moving on, Benjamin Franklin, and it's a good quote to go read, but in the First Continental Congress, he stood up and advocated that they start every session with prayer before they got started. And the point that he made there was that God had guided them in the past through the Revolution and the years leading up to the drafting of the Constitution, and that he was integral in their successes. And Franklin said, "How can we turn from him now?" Interesting address there. And finally, Washington's first inaugural address again links very heavily Christianity to the country, and makes the point that basically all the people in the country felt more or less like he did, that we were there because of divine influence. Again, the reason, in my opinion, why the Constitution was so vague about Christianity was, in the words of Jefferson, the importance of the 10th Amendment, that we respect the state's sovereignty and leave those decisions up to the states.